It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 135. This is about Paul Manafort and his association with Donald Trump. According to Gates, in March 2016, Paul Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. Subset 2, Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyovochin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages had been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, "our friends," the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, "absolutely, every article." Manafort further asked, "how do we use to get whole? Has Deripaska operation seen?" Kilimnik wrote back the same day, "yes, I have been sending everything to Victor," that's Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD. That's Deripaska. Gates report that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would, quote, "be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine." Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role on the campaign would help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska could not move forward with his lawsuit against Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik in turn could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information could also be shared with Deripaska. The next sentence has been deleted by Bill Barr. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instructions, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office, that's the Mueller office, that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates' account about polling is consistent, and then the rest of that is blacked out by Bill Barr. With multiple emails that Kilimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kilimnik internal data, and then the rest of that paragraph is blocked out by Bill Barr. The office also obtained, that's the Mueller office, also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kilimnik whether there had been any movement, quote, "on this issue with our friend." Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue, and our biggest interest as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue, Kilimnik replied, quote, "I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significantly more attention to the campaign in his boss Deripaska's mind, and that he will most likely be looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss Deripaska," end of quote. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kilimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, quote, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate, end quote. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. It's the Mueller report. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Has established investments in Eastern Europe. Deripaska was the sole investor. It's the Mueller report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wow, what a day. Donald Trump, it looks like Trump is violating the Hatch Act all by himself. He doesn't need Kellyanne Conway to do it. The Democratic Party is not getting tickets to the event on the National Mall where Donald Trump is going to hold his Trump rally. Only the Republicans are passing out tickets to their big donors. This is bizarre. That's the kind of, bad, bizarre, illegal news. I guess the good news is that, or maybe, I don't know, it's not good news. I wouldn't wish this on. But, it looks like the weather's going to be pretty bad. Anyhow, there's a bunch of other things that I want to get to, throughout the program today. And we're going to get to the economy and patents and drugs and stuff like that a little later on in the program. And Steve Keen is going to drop by. In fact, in our third hour, just one of the most brilliant international economists I've ever known. And we're going to talk about the fate and future of our economy. But I'd like to start with the simple and kind of tragic fact that for the last 18 years, we have continuously been at war. And in fact, we have expanded the number of wars. We've added, Libya. We've added Syria. Now we're collaborating with the Saudis in Yemen. If we want to stop stupid wars, to use the phrase that Trump used on the campaign trail, that frankly I think got him a lot of votes. I think a lot of people, agree that many of these were. He came right out and said George W. Bush lied us into a war. He said that on the campaign trail. I think it's one of the reasons why he ate Jeb Bush's lunch. Because, Americans know this, Republicans and Democrats, they know that George W. Bush is a war criminal who lied us into a war and should have been prosecuted for it. Actually, Dick Cheney seems to be the major force behind that. And what happened to him? Well, he Halliburton was failing. It was on the edge of bankruptcy. Halliburton is now worth billions. And his weird daughter is now in the U.S. House of Representatives. So, or the Senate or something. Did she run for the Senate successfully? One or the other. Anyhow, it's not something high on my list to keep track of the Cheney family. In fact, it makes me rather nauseous. But nonetheless, I think if we want to stop stupid wars, And if you have a better way to stop stupid wars than this, let me know. But I think for this, to stop stupid wars, we need to return to the draft. Now, not the full-blown draft like we had during the Vietnam era, where it's like you go into the military or nothing. But, now you've got Trump threatening wars in Iran and Venezuela, and there is not widespread public outrage about this. Why? Because widespread across the, fewer than 1%, I believe, maybe 2% at the most, of American families actually have a family member who's in the military. And that was certainly not the case in the 60s and 70s. It was certainly not the case in the 1940s during World War II. It certainly was not the case during World War I. It certainly wasn't the case during the Civil War. When you have a draft, suddenly the American populace says, oh, you want to go to war with Iran? Think twice, buddy. You want to go to war with Venezuela? I mean, if our children had to participate in wars, or if the young people who are listening to me right now, if you're under, 26, I think is was the top of the draft age during the Vietnam War, would you be all that enthusiastic about Trump's, saber rattling? But instead, we now have an army that's made up either of people trying to escape poverty, people trying to figure out how to get to college, or people who have, a long military tradition in their families, and I honor that. There's nothing wrong with that at all, except that we've got this kind of perverse incentive built into the military that, the normal process of rising through the ranks, which also includes not only increasing your rank, but also your pay, and thus even your pension, that normal process of rising through the ranks is rather slow when there's not a war going on. But if there is a war going on and you can get deployed to a war zone, boom, you can rise up through the ranks very quickly. And so, where is the incentive not to have wars? And the other consequence of this is that you end up with a military that's missing the diversity of the American people. It is, made up largely of people either with a gung-ho military family background attitude, or people who are trying to escape poverty or trying to at least make it through, get a GI Bill to go to college. And that doesn't necessarily give you the kind of diversity that you see in the military. And by diversity, I'm talking about diversity of opinion as much as, racial or national ancestry diversity, diversity of politics. I mean, can you imagine, a group of soldiers wearing Donald Trump badges stitched onto their uniforms if the military truly represented the American populace? I can't. Maybe I'm missing something, but I just can't. But, the military is largely missing that diversity, which is why 18 years of continuous warfare has not become a huge political issue. Well, now Deval Patrick and General Stanley McChrystal, and I met McChrystal at a Talkers Magazine event, the talk radio industry event, back must have been 2005 or thereabouts, I think. It was fairly early on in the Afghanistan war, and he had just come back from Afghanistan, and I said, General, what's your take on what's going on there? And he said to me, we will not be able to kill our way out of this war. And he made another point to somebody else who was talking to him that the war only took a month or so. The war was over. What was then going on was an occupation. And that's what we've been doing for 18 years is, low-level conflict in an occupation. It's what the British did with us. And, generally speaking, people don't like their countries to be occupied. So anyhow, Deval Patrick and General McChrystal have proposed a national service program. Now, my proposal for a national service program would say, okay, you can, after you get out of high school, you spend a year serving your country. You can spend that year in the military, or you can spend that year volunteering in a hospital, or joining, Service for America, one of these national service programs, Habitat for Humanity, building houses for poor people. Low-income people. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you could volunteer. I would eliminate religious organizations from this because I don't think you want somebody volunteering at a mega church to help raise money for the pastor's new $20 million jet. But outside of that, nonprofit organizations or military service, your choice. And at the end of that year, you've got college all the way to an MD or PhD, or trade school all the way to an apprenticeship and a good solid job in a union shop for free. In fact, maybe even we could do like Denmark and give people a small stipend to help pay for housing and books. In my humble opinion, it's time to institute a national service program. I would call it that. I wouldn't call it a draft, but I would make it mandatory. And, you have your choice. There's also, with free college or trade school at the end of this, there's also a psychological reason for this. One of the things that we know from, and this goes back to the days of Sigmund Freud. One of the things that we know is that there are these developmental stages that kids go through. One of the reasons that, the terrible twos are as terrible as they are is that, kids are starting to create an identity of themselves as being independent from mom. This is typically the time that they stop breastfeeding. It's the time they start actually eating solid food. It's the time that they start figuring out that they can manipulate the world rather than simply being part of the manipulated. That's the terrible twos. Then you see the next time that kids go through a major separation tends to be around adolescence, around puberty, and that's the point at which they're actually shifting internally. They're shifting the groups with which they affiliate. Instead of boys always hanging out with boys, they start wanting to hang out with girls, and instead of girls always hanging out with girls, they start wanting to hang out with boys, and of course everything in between. Without getting into a long discussion about gender and identity and all that, but you get the point. There's this second kind of shift that happens right around puberty, and it's hormone driven, by and large. And then there's a third shift that happens, typically within 5 years of that second shift, and you see this in kids that are somewhere between 13 or 14, all the way up to 18 or 19. Somewhere during that period of time, they tend to get into conflict with their own parents. And parents will say, oh, yeah, I don't even know my kid anymore. Who is this monster who came living in my house? It looks just like my son or daughter, but I don't know who this person is. Well, it turns out what's going on, and this is a normal and healthy developmental phase. This is when the child is going from being a member of and dependent on the family to being to having an independent identity out in the world, which is absolutely a necessary transitional stage to the next process where they might find a life partner, or they go off and start a job or a career, and they begin basically becoming an adult. And that third stage, that big stage, that developmental stage, is a major life transition. We religiously, and these are religions that go back thousands of years. In Catholicism, it's confirmation. In Judaism, it's bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. I'm sure that there's a parallel in Islam and in Hinduism and in Buddhism. I'm just not familiar with the titles, with the names. And this is this rite of passage. Well, for us in American culture, the closest that we have to that rite of passage is graduating from high school, which is really not that big a deal. I mean, there was a time when it might have been a bigger deal, but really, a year of national service where you actually leave home and you go off to some other part of the country and build houses, or go off and join the Air Force or the Army for a year, or whatever it may be. That's a healthy psychological thing. On the back end of that, when you're done with that, you're now an adult. And so there's a psychological reason for this, there's a cultural reason for this, there's a military reason for this, there's a political reason for this. It strengthens our country. We need volunteers, we need people helping out, and what a great time in your life to be out there learning, carpentry, building houses, or learning, what it's like inside a hospital as you're trying to decide what kind of career you want to go into, and you volunteer in a hospital. Oh, gee, I think I'll go into medicine. Or you volunteer, with NASA or something, and hey, I think I'll go into the space program and be an astronaut, whatever it may be. I think this is a good idea. Now, that said, I'm way past draft age, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that. And I was pretty pissed off about the draft back when I was of draft age. But there was no non-military option back then, and there was a war going on that we had no say in and we could not vote about. Now 18-year-olds can vote. So what do you think? Particularly if you're a young person.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I also want to get into a conversation about what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her buddies saw down at the border. We'll get into that in about 4 or 5 minutes. Stick around. And welcome back. Leslie in Central Square, New York. Hey, Leslie, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I actually still kind of agree with the draft, but I think that high school students ought to be taught when the military comes in what war you're in and who invaded who, and at least 4 or 5 wars back, with at least 2 or 3 hours education on whether we're going to war for the people or for the corporations.
Leslie, don't you think that if students knew that when they graduated from high school, they had to make a choice between going into the military or, volunteering in a hospital or building houses or something, that they would start having a real serious interest in international geopolitics, and that would create the demand that would produce the high school and junior high school courses about the history of the warfare, the history of the military, current civics, where we're at right now, what, the geography of the world, where there are wars, where there's potential hotspots, who are our friends, who are our enemies. Might that not cause them to get engaged?
I think you're right, Tom, but I think there should be some specifics which don't take long to do. The facts, whether we invade countries or they invade us, is a big thing.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And again, should be studied. Leslie, thank you for the call. Tim in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about the economy a little bit, and of course, what you're talking about as far as the wars. I am a veteran, and I tell most people now that they better think about what they're doing before they sign up. I really go along with what you're saying as far as the getting people involved in something different than just going over and fighting. I think the big thing on the economy and war is history. Now, getting into the history and the economy is, in 1919, what the heck was going on then? We did the same thing that is going on now.
You're talking about 1929, actually.
Going on.
Yeah.
Yes, but the same thing was going on in 1919. What the heck's going on?
Yeah, 1929 is the year you're thinking of. That's the year the stock market fell apart.
No. Let's go back to 1919.
Okay, what happened in 1919 that I don't know about? Tell me.
I believe that was Hoovervilles were being created.
No. Herbert Hoover was elected president in 1928, and in 1929 the stock market fell apart. And by 1930 and 31 and 32, you had the Hoovervilles, the widespread poverty, 35% unemployment. And then in the election of 32, Franklin Roosevelt was elected, and he was sworn into office March 4th, 1933.
Okay, so you being a professor, tell me what was going on in 1919.
Well, that's what I don't know. That's why I don't know why you keep mentioning 1919. I'll tell you what was going on in 1920, because it was 1920. Actually, in 1919, the top tax rate was 91%. I think Woodrow Wilson was still president. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. And Warren Harding ran for election in 1920 and got elected in November of 1920, took office in March of 1921. And he was a Republican. Wilson had been a Democrat, and he immediately lowered the top tax rate down to 25%, which kicked off the Roaring '20s, which led up to the Great Crash. And that's where we're at right now, Tim. Thanks a lot for the call. By the way, just one other thing to add to my little rant about the draft. Don't you think, most Americans, and we've all seen, these little bits that the late night shows do where they walk up to an American and say, can you identify Iran on a map or something like that? Or, Our high school graduates tend to be profoundly unaware of international geography and international geopolitics. Don't you think that if young people knew that they might end up fighting in a war if Congress were to declare one or the president were to get us into one, that they would start paying attention to that in high school and junior high school, and that high schools and junior high schools would start more aggressively teaching international geopolitics, how countries work, how wars work, the history of war, what's going on where, who are our allies, who are not our allies, why are they our allies, why are they not our allies? Donald Trump didn't even know what a liberal democracy was, which has got nothing to do with liberals or conservatives. Liberal democracy is the phrase that came out of the Enlightenment. John Locke, Thomas Jefferson. It's what this country is. We're a liberal democracy. Canada's a liberal democracy. Literally, Donald Trump didn't know that. He wasn't paying attention in high school. I mean, Trump's a little bit older than me, but, I remember learning that in elementary school, frankly. But, we wouldn't have people as stupid or as malinformed or uninformed as Donald Trump is I think if we had I think Trump is actually the weird exception. But anyhow, I also want to get into what's going on down on our southern border. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, I can see why CPB officers were being so physically and sexually threatening toward me. Say what? There's a story there. Officers were keeping women in cells with no water, told them to drink out of the toilets. And this was the officers being on their good behavior in front of members of Congress. She says people drinking out of toilets, officers laughing in front of members of Congress. She said, after I forced myself into a cell with women and began speaking to them, one of them described their treatment at the hands of officers as psychological warfare, waking them up at odd hours for no reason, calling them whores, etc. Tell me, what does this have to do with lack of funding? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I mean, this, and now we discover that there's a Facebook group with 9,500 members. There's only 20,000 people who work for Customs and Border Protection, CBP. 20,000 people. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, there are 20,000 Customs and Border Protection agents in the U.S. 9,500, almost half that number, are in a racist and sexually violent secret CPB Facebook group. This isn't a few bad eggs, she tweets. This is a violent culture. God bless this woman. She's going to be president of the United States someday. She's, it's amazing. Representative Ilhan Omar tells the story. This is disturbing. This is disgusting. This is the agency we trust to address the migrant crisis at our border. This only confirms our worst fears, and we cannot continue to give blank checks to ICE and CBP. In this Facebook room, message board, they were talking about a 16-year-old Guatemalan who died in their custody, and one of the guys who apparently was there, oh, well, if he dies, he dies. They were talking about the Salvadoran father and his daughter, Oscar Alberto Ramirez, and his daughter Valeria, who drowned trying to cross the Rio Grande. Oh, that was edited by Dems and liberals. We've got a serious problem here. And meanwhile, the CPB officers, they said Ocasio-Cortez, quote, screamed at them in a threatening manner. A reporter who was there, Jonathan Katz, he says, nope. He says, everything I've seen about her leading the tour is a lie.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is amazing. This is absolutely amazing what's going on here. We need congressional hearings, and we need them now. It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 135. This is about Paul Manafort and his association with Donald Trump. According to Gates, in March 2016, Paul Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. Subset 2, Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyovochin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages had been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, our friends, the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, absolutely, every article. Manafort further asked, how do we use to get whole? Has Deripaska operation seen? Kilimnik wrote back the same day, yes, I have been sending everything to Victor, that's Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD. That's Deripaska. Gates reported that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would, quote, be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine. Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role on the campaign would help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska could not move forward with his lawsuit against Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik, in turn, could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information could also be shared with Deripaska. The next sentence has been deleted by Bill Barr. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instructions, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office, that's the Mueller office, that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates' account about polling is consistent, and then the rest of that is blacked out by Bill Barr. With multiple emails that Kilimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kilimnik internal data, and then the rest of that paragraph is blocked out by Bill Barr. The office also obtained, that's the Mueller office, also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kilimnik whether there had been any movement, quote, on this issue with our friend. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue, and our biggest interest as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue. Kilimnik replied, quote, I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significantly more attention to the campaign in his boss Deripaska's mind, and that he will most likely be looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss, Deripaska, end of quote. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kilimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, quote, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate, end quote. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Wow, the grassroots group Never Again Action says they're blocking the road to the Elizabeth Detention Center in Elizabeth, New Jersey, holding signs reading "Never Again for Anyone" and "Jews demand freedom for immigrants." This is a Never Again group of largely Jewish people who are saying, well, here, this is Tate Phoenix, one of the protesters, said, "I am a Jewish Latina. The military camps where my people are being held today are concentration camps, just like the camps my people were held in 75 years ago were concentration camps. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here." Another said, "As Jews, we were taught to never let anything like the Holocaust happen again. We refuse to wait and see what happens here now." 36 people arrested as they were protesting this. This is absolutely incredible. Anyhow, so, we've got a lot on the table here. Don in Evergreen, Colorado. What's on your mind today, Don?
Yeah, Tom. Two more legs to the triad for preventing the stupid wars.
Yeah.
The first, it used to be illegal to do war profiteering, or at least in theory. If we could make it so that if the U.S. was involved in a war, the people supplying the armaments could not make more than, say, a 2% profit. It was hard to find and carefully tracked, then there'd be less incentive for them to do that. It's a little harder when you get into international arms sales, but at least we could take some of the profit motive out.
Mm-hmm.
The other leg, which might also help at the border, is student or cultural exchanges, where, as over my career as an international airline pilot, I've been to 6 of the 7 continents. And everywhere I go, people are people. They're just wonderful. It's just the governments that muck things up.
Yeah.
But if people could travel more and experience other cultures, don't go to try and change them or anything, but go to learn what they have, what from their culture you can incorporate to make our lives better, and vice versa. People around the world, the more you have friends in other countries, the less you're likely to try and fight them.
Yeah, and frankly, I wasn't thinking about international travel, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that could work just as well. So, and the last time, to the best of my knowledge, there was anything about war profiteering, Franklin Roosevelt famously said there will be no new war millionaires made from our current troubles, and he created a commission in Congress to look into this. And this was during his 3rd term. Harry Truman was not yet his president, or his vice president, as I recall. And my recollection, it was called the Truman Commission, that Harry Truman was put in charge of that commission. And they took these defense contractors, and many of them, of course, were not defense contractors at the time. They were car makers and nylon hose makers and whatnot who were. But they really took them over the coals. I mean, they allowed profit, but not excessive profits. And to the best of my knowledge, that has not happened since. And this is what Dwight Eisenhower warned us about, and it's something we need to take very seriously. Don, excellent points both. Thank you so much for the call. Charles in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. I would like to talk about what you started your show with. I've been advocating to my friends for years what this government should do when high school graduates graduate high school. They need to spend 2 years doing some kind of civic duty, either 2 years in the military or 2 years volunteering.
Yeah, I think 1 year might be enough, but I agree.
Well, I say 2 years because it's going to take them 1 year to learn and to get up to speed.
Yeah.
And once they're up to speed, it's sad to see that talent leave, at least utilize it for a year.
Yeah.
But 2 years does two things. On the political side, you would have some people going to the military that would genuinely like it.
Mm-hmm.
You would have some people going to the military to get a skill. You would have people volunteering to get a skill. Once you've done your 2 years, then your entire college education should be a free ride.
Mm-hmm.
But most important, what it does is it keeps fresh bodies rotating into the military.
Yep.
But on the economic side, what I see is it keeps young people for at least 2 years out of the job market, leaving those jobs for the breadwinners that have families.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
And that
that's
way
sort of
it
like my suggestion that we lower the Social Security age from 65 to 60. That would also open up a lot of job opportunities for people in the middle.
You know, then that way, like I say, it would cut down on the unemployment.
Yeah.
Because give them 2 years to gain a skill, and on top of that, at least in this current generation, at least some form of responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. The 1 year, 2 year thing is something that we could work out, like having congressional hearings and having, elections and stuff like that. But thank you, Charles. Yeah, you added another dimension to this. John in Los Angeles. John says you want to disagree with me. What's up?
Yeah, that idea that you and the other callers talking about is stark raving mad.
Okay, why?
Okay, I'm a black man, okay, and for one, in a liberated so-called lily world, yeah, that would be nice, and it would work out that way. It would. That ain't the world we're living in. Sorry to everyone who's privileged, but once my people would get crushed, because we always get crushed when it comes to those types of things. We got crushed in every draft. We got crushed everywhere. And why would I volunteer for a country that gunned me down in the streets?
Yeah, I believe, John, that there are more minorities in the military right now than in the general population.
They were forced in there because of financial reasons.
That's my point. And we shouldn't have, as the old phrase goes, people willing to be shot at for a sixpence.
No, my point is, why don't you bring that taxes back up to 91% for the ones that's way up there with their money, bring in a VAT tax, a wealth tax, and then what they call a millionaire mediocre tax, and that way school will be funded, and then deprivatize the military. All arms should be made by the military.
Well, I agree with you on all of that. I just don't understand your objection to having a year of either military service or nonprofit service.
Because when I was in high school, we had vocational school with our high school.
So did I. I took shop class.
Okay, and we got to go right back to that.
I learned how to use a lathe. I made a spoon rack for my dad.
Exactly.
I was junior high school, actually.
A carpenter and a plumber.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
That needs to go back into the high school. And in fact, high school needs to be extended 2 years. Why? Because those 2 years could be spent on figuring out what you want to do in life and get into proper education and line it up.
Well, this is John, my public service thing. I mean, if you've got a year that you can volunteer to help build houses for poor people, or you can volunteer to go somewhere else in the world with what's the service corps that we've got? The Peace Corps. People would see the world. That would be how is that a bad thing, John? Plus, it's all paid for with tax dollars.
First off, what I'm saying is the public service part, as far as, I'm not talking about the military. Screw that. Okay. You find enough people that want to fight on their own. Just take a look at the United States streets. As a public, yeah, every child should get some form of, I wouldn't say public service, I would say some type of pre-training before you get into a college.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on. I think pretty much everything except your thing on the draft, and we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. John, thanks a lot for the call. Barbara in Redondo Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Hi, this is so exciting to talk to you. I love everything you've done this morning. I really agree with everyone. The draft for 18-year-olds, all 18-year-olds, men and women, and the choice for military service or rebuilding. We could rebuild the war zones that we've destroyed. We could rebuild our solar infrastructure. I love the idea of the free college, and we've earned it with those 2 years. And we could also provide aid at the borders. I mean, this is a fabulous idea, and I really thank you for it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barbara. It's great to hear from you, and thanks again for listening. Tim in Chicago. Tim, your thoughts?
How you doing, Tom? Thanks very much for Friday night. That was a very good.
That was a hoot there out at Frugal Muse, and they always do such a nice job for us, although the bookstore was like really packed. Anyhow, what's on your mind?
Well, I hail from the other side of the gun side. I'm a conservative that owns guns and believes in the Second Amendment as it is being applied by most gun owners today. And I found your positions fantastic. I found your perspective enlightening and encouraging. And I just called to say I really hope that you get to have some kind of influence in this debate, because the rhetoric and the actions out there on both sides have become so fevered-pitched that, as I mentioned to you that night, I'm definitely going to write an article on that night, and I'm going to write a critique of your book. And I won't hide the fact that they're both going to be fairly positive. I'm not going to pretend that you're an enemy of the state because you don't believe on everything I agree with.
Because I'm a liberal. No, Tim, and my point is, nobody's talking about banning guns. It's I'm a sports shooter. I like shooting guns. My brother and I do it for fun in his backyard.
Many people are talking about banning guns. Many Democrats.
I don't know a single Democrat, Tim, who's ever said that. Honest to God, if you can name one Democrat who's ever suggested banning guns, I will publicly shame them. But I don't think you can name one.
Wasn't that Representative Stilwell at the presidential?
Swalwell. He's talking about banning assault weapons, which, by the way, was the law of the land for 10 years, and and was voted for by both Democrats and Republicans.
And an assault rifle is not a Ruger 10/22. Luckily, you do know a little bit about firearms. A 1911, which is on the cover of the book I'm holding right now, called The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by Thom Hartmann, that's not an assault weapon. But anything semi-automatic by Stilwell and his side of the coin classifies as an assault weapon because they are, quote, semi-automatic, quote, unquote. Yeah. Well, an AR-15 is semi-automatic, and so is a Ruger 10/22, so is a 760. I mean, there's many guns that are semi-automatic. Yeah. That ignorant people should not be in charge of this debate.
Yeah, so is the Taurus 40 caliber that I'm shooting in my picture in the back of the book. Although I do think that we should be regulating semi-automatic weapons more aggressively than we do regular revolvers, and that's probably the one area, Tim, where you and I diverge in our opinions.
No, I would like to reach out and agree with you on some things, and I think that what I witnessed talking to a bunch of people during afterwards and whatnot is there's many innocent, honest people in the majority of us are innocent and honest people in this gun debate that need to have the spotlight, not the radicals.
Yeah, we need to have a conversation about it. We really need when 40,000 people are killed by anything, whether it's polio or guns, we need to have a national conversation about it. Tim, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for being a reasonable conservative. Sometime call on something we disagree on, and we'll try that being reasonable, too. I appreciate the call. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. It is coming up on 48 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls after this, and in the next hour, I want to get into I have the solution for prescription drug prices. It's amazing. Stick around. And welcome back, Lucretia in Los Angeles. Hey, Lucretia, what's up?
Hi, good morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm great. What's on your mind?
The draft. I have to say that as soon as I heard the term.
Yeah, Lucretia, if I could ask you to put your mouth right next to your phone, because it sounds like you're talking to me from the restroom, you know?
Absolutely. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds normal now. What's up? So you were saying, as soon as you heard the term the draft.
Yes, it frightened me.
Sure.
And I'm going to say that because, yes, coming from personal experience, my uncle, man of color, he was one of the types that participated in the Watts riot. He was an activist type, but he was drafted to go to Vietnam War, and when he got back, he was ruined.
Oh, I had several friends. I had two friends who died in Vietnam and a couple of others who I think were, well, one of them is a homeless person now. I mean, badly damaged by it. People that I went to high school with. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And these were not people of color, but, I think it just, that the Vietnam War was a horribly wounding experience for this entire country.
Yes. So it's like the gentleman that called earlier, I could understand the frustration. I think the term draft in itself, like I said, once I heard that, I was like, because when the draft was removed, it was one of those sighs of relief.
Oh, I remember it well. Yeah. But if we make it a year of national service with a military option or a nonprofit option, and the nonprofit option could be either domestic or even international if you want to join the Peace Corps, that seems like a whole different thing, or not.
Yeah, well, it seems that way, but the fear comes on my end on how, well-placed intentions are often twisted to fall back on impoverished people and people of color to be used as a sacrificial resource.
Right.
And, not having the money to, like a lot of individuals who bought themselves out, paid to stay out of the wars, were able to pay to stay out of the draft. And even the idea of, even if we had the money, the technicality that was good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander.
Yeah, George W. Bush was an example of that.
Up and back.
Yeah, I get that, and to a large extent, that's what we've got right now. I mean, a good chunk of our current military, and I don't know that anybody's compiled good statistics on this, but a good chunk of our current military are people who are there trying to escape poverty. So, A, let's eliminate poverty in the United States, and B, a national service program that could or could not, doesn't have to include military service, but that's one of the options. It just seems like a healthy thing. I lived in Germany for a year, 86, 87. And I don't know if Germany is still doing this, but back then you had to serve a year after you left high school. And I was working part-time with this nonprofit that ran a hospital. And most of the people who were working there, and they actually drew a small paycheck too. In addition to room and board, they were there rather than going into the military. This was their year of military service. They were all 18, 19 years old. And, great kids who had come from all over Germany to this little town in the Frankenwald, in the middle of nowhere, discovering new cultures and new people. So, but I get your concern. Lucretia, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Norway is a democratic socialist country. The United States here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, this just to recap this very, very quickly, what I'm suggesting, and by the way, there's now a movement starting for this. DeVal Patrick, a Democrat, and General McChrystal, Stanley McChrystal, who I don't know that he's political at all. He's retired now from the military, but was our commander in Afghanistan for a while. These two guys have gotten together and said, we need a year of national service or a national service program for kids who graduate high school and can spend some time just, kind of catching up. And I think that this is a rite of passage thing. I think it's healthy. I think that filling our military. So, just to recap, number one, I'm not talking about a pure military draft. In fact, I think the majority of people who would go into this would probably go into the nonprofit sector. It could be the Peace Corps. It could be something domestic. Number one, this helps our country. It helps our kids. I lived in Germany for a year where they had this program in place. I worked in a hospital there, or it was attached to the facility, to this nonprofit that I was working with, Salem International. SalemInternational.org is their website if you want to know more about it. We had a natural health clinic there, and there were a bunch of young people in their 18-year-olds who, rather than go to the military, they spent their year working there, helping people and learning about medicine and all kinds of stuff, and it seemed to work out quite well. So anyhow, Lynn in the Los Angeles area. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind?
Same thing. I was a college advisor and a career advisor for 10 years in the inner city, South Central areas in LA, witnessing students of low income of color being recruited by military recruiters who got money for each signature and application that they successfully acquired. Meanwhile, I would go into classrooms and ask the seniors and the juniors, hey, what do you guys plan to do with your future? Half said, I don't know, consistently. And when they go to community colleges to find themselves, they rack up student debt. They tend not to graduate on time, and they get lost. Sometimes they drop out without degrees. So I used to also recruit for a program called City Year, where they gained experience in the world as a volunteer in schools, and they got leadership training, they got a stipend, they got transportation, and these programs are very positive for students who, like the 50% or more, who have no idea what they want to do with their future. So I highly endorse what you propose. And I don't think it disadvantages the low-income students. On the other side, I think it, on the other hand, gives them the knowledge that they need and the self-awareness as well as awareness of where they want to go in life without racking up student debt or going into the military thinking it's a good deal and finding out later that they made a mistake.
Well, and if we made it universal, this gets back to my point about diversity. And again, I wasn't talking so much about racial or religious diversity as economic and status, essentially, diversity, that wealthy white kids growing up who grow up in this weird little bubble and never even encounter people of color, during that year, they would be side by side with a whole spectrum, and not just people of color, even poor white people. They would have, they would encounter this whole spectrum of humanity that they might otherwise, they'd be like Brett Kavanaugh, privileged kid through his entire life, never even encounter. He probably doesn't even know what poverty looks like.
That's right. I totally agree.
Yeah. Lynn, thank you very much for the call. Fascinating conversation. We'll continue it after the break. But first, I want to tell you how we're going to solve the drug problem, the drug price problem. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 135. This is about Paul Manafort and his association with Donald Trump. According to Gates, in March 2016, Paul Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. Subset 2, Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyovochin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages had been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, our friends, the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, absolutely, every article. Manafort further asked, how do we use to get whole? Has Deripaska operation seen? Kilimnik wrote back the same day, yes, I have been sending everything to Victor, that's Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD. That's Deripaska. Gates report that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would, quote, be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine. Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role on the campaign would help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska could not move forward with his lawsuit against Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik in turn could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information could also be shared with Deripaska. The next sentence has been deleted by Bill Barr. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instructions, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office, that's the Mueller office, that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates's account about polling is consistent and then the rest of that is blacked out by Bill Barr. With multiple emails that Kalimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kalimnik internal data, and then the rest of that paragraph is blocked out by Bill Barr. The office also obtained, that's the Mueller office, also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kalimnik whether there had been any movement, quote, on this issue with our friend. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue, and our biggest interest as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue. Kalimnik replied, quote, I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significantly more attention to the campaign in his boss Deripaska's mind, and that he will most likely be looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss Deripaska, end of quote. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kalimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, quote, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate, end quote. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Our program brought to you by 8 Sleep. The Pod is the first bed designed to boost your performance. More at 8sleep.com/Tom, T-H-O-M. We've been talking about whether we should start a national service program here in the United States. Deval Patrick and Stanley McChrystal, the former general who ran the war in Afghanistan, the guy that back in 2004, 2005 told me we were both speaking at a talkers event, the talk radio industry event that goes on every June in New York City. I asked him, I said, how's it going in Afghanistan? What do you think about this, this situation there? And he said, we will not be able to kill our way out of this. And that has stuck with me all these years, hearing from this, general. Right, and ramrod straight, military bearing, the whole bit. We cannot kill our way out of this. Wow. So anyhow, should we have a national service program, a draft, if you were, after high school, young men and women spend a year. They have a choice. They can go into the military, or they can do it nonprofit. They could do, the Service for America kind of programs. They could do it through, building homes for the homeless, through Habitat for Humanity. They could do the Peace Corps, travel around the world and see the world. They would get a small stipend for this, so that it doesn't cost them anything. It gives them an opportunity to have a transition out of family and into independence and adulthood. It gives them a chance to really give some serious thought to what they want to do when they grow up. I think this is a good and healthy thing. So we've been discussing that for the last hour. A couple of other things, though, that I want to get into, and I want to get into in some detail with you. The first is Trump. Well, not just Trump. Everyone says the economy is great. Well, I know the stock market is up. The stock market is up because Trump's tax cut has allowed corporations to buy back their own stocks, which jacks stock prices without increasing the actual value of the company. It just means there's fewer shares of stock in circulation, so each share has a slightly higher value. So the stock market is up, but for BS reasons. Unemployment is low, but if you look at the labor participation rate, which the Republicans were constantly talking about, when they were running against Hillary, when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton or during the Republican primary. The labor participation rate is the real number. I mean, we don't consider somebody unemployed if they haven't had a job in a year because they haven't been able to find a job. And there's large chunks of America, from inner city areas to rural areas, where there just aren't any jobs. And you can go easily a year without a job, and suddenly you're no longer considered for the unemployment statistics. But the labor participation rate is in the mid-60s. We're talking 67, 68% of people who are actually eligible to work are working. So, arguably, we've got an unemployment rate that's in the 30% region, which is the reason why wages are not going up. So anyhow, everybody says the economy is so great. How's the economy affecting you? What's your experience of this economy? And also, I want to get into this whole thing about drug prices. This is, first of all, one of the things, Trump told a lot of lies when he was running for president, right? He said no more stupid wars, and here we are supporting Saudi Arabia in this stupid war in Yemen that has now become the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with literally tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of children starving to death as we speak. As you and I are talking right now, American bombs are being dropped on Yemen by the Saudi military, and this brutal dictator who literally crucified somebody just the other day. You speak up against his administration, you get your head cut off, or you get crucified. And this is Trump's idea of a good thing. But off on a tangent there. But anyhow, back to where we're at with Trump's promises. Trump promised that he wasn't going to get us into stupid wars. He promised that he was going to lower drug prices. He promised that he'd have a better plan for health care than Obamacare that would not be single payer or government run. Right. He promised that he was going to bring back our jobs. No, we've actually lost more jobs overseas. In fact, one of the trade agreements that he's promoting, the new NAFTA, even it was in his tax bill. Now companies can deduct up to 50% of the cost of moving jobs overseas, whereas before they couldn't, it was largely not deductible. So he's actually increased the incentives for companies to move jobs overseas. He lied about that. He's lied about pretty much everything, other than that he wants to build a wall, which is a completely ineffective, 13th century solution to a 21st century problem that, has to do with massive climate change and political dislocation in Central America that we should be helping them out with, rather than putting their people in, particularly their children, in cages in dog pounds when they come here to the United States, and then paying some private corporation that's got John Kelly on his board of directors $750 a day to keep somebody in a dog cage with no soap and no shower. I mean, and no doctors. Now they're going to court to prevent doctors from going in to see these people. This is nuts. But back to drug prices. Drug prices last year went up 500% faster than the inflation rate. They looked at 3,400 drugs. This is from a report from CBS News. So far in 2019, more than 3,400 drugs have boosted their prices an average 17%. The rate of inflation right now is a little over 1%. So why are drug prices going up, and what can we do about it? Trump is dithering about this. He's like, oh, maybe transparency. If we just list the prices of drugs, it's not that hard to find the prices. Maybe we need more coupons. I mean, it's just, he's floundering. I've got a solution, and it's not just mine. I mean, Dean Baker actually wrote about this over at Truthout, and I so agree with him. And by the way, this is one of the things Thomas Jefferson was ranting about in his letter to James Madison in December of 1787 rather, when he wanted a ban on commercial monopolies put into the Constitution. What he was talking about was not only the kind of monopolies where, Amazon controls the world. He was also talking about patents. And, Jefferson was a prolific inventor, as was Ben Franklin. They invented a whole lot of things that to this day we use, and yet they never patented any of them. Why? Because they didn't think it was best for the country. So why are drug prices so high? I mean, there's very few drugs that cost more than, pennies a pill to make. Even the new really expensive drugs, the drugs that they're charging $10,000 a pill for, or $100,000 for a year's course of, like one of those cancer drugs that Louise took that literally saved her life. the actual manufactured cost of that drug is around $4 a dose. So how is it that they're charging $100,000? Well, they're saying, well, we have to charge $100,000 because we spend so much money developing drugs. Actually, what they spend so much money doing is A, advertising them on television, and B, figuring out ways to tweak an already existing drug, just slightly change the molecule so you can give it a new name and have a brand new patent, or you can call it a new version of the same drug. In other words, they're gaming the system. Why are they doing this? Again, because of patents. If you patent something, then you're the only person who can make it, unless you license somebody else with that patent. So here's the solution. Let's do away with drug patents. No more patents on drugs, period. I mean, when the guy who invented insulin back in the 1890s, or discovered a way to purify, I think it was pig insulin at the time, and make it, and use it for humans to deal with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, he gave that away. He refused to patent it because he never wanted anybody to have to pay for insulin. And now you've got people, diabetics, who are having to pay $1,500 a month for diabetes drug, for their insulin. Why? Because the companies were able to tweak very, very slightly the molecule, change it just a little bit, or even lock down the generics. This is wrong. So now, obviously, if you say we're not going to patent drugs anymore, of course, the cost of a drug is going to go down to the price of basically herbs at CVS. It's $3 a bottle for some ginkgo biloba or whatever. But you would say, well, then the drug companies don't have any incentive to develop new products. Well, to a certain extent, that's BS. You can't patent coffee, and yet there's no lack of competition in the coffee arena. You can't patent tea, but there's no lack of competition in the tea arena. You can't patent bread, but there's no lack of competition in the bread arena, and there's new companies coming along all the time. So number one, it's a BS argument. But number two, it does cost a lot of money to develop drugs. In fact, you and I, last year, through the National Institutes of Health, spent $40 billion developing new drugs, which we then gave to the drug companies for them to patent. Why do we do that? And then the drug companies themselves claim that they spent an additional $80 billion on this. Best guess, probably $5 billion of that was actually, cutting edge research. Most of it was tweaking existing things. But we're going to spend $460 billion a year this year on drugs that the true cost that in a real free market, if drugs were marketed the way that coffee is marketed or bread is marketed, or herbs are marketed, or vitamins are marketed, you can't patent vitamins. If we were to treat pharmaceuticals the same way we treated those things in terms of their ability to be patented, that $460 billion that you and I are spending on drugs would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 billion. So what about the research that the companies are doing? Well, let's have the government do all the research or fund all the research. It's fine. The drug companies can apply for government grants to do research, and then the government can say, no, we're not going to give you a grant to tweak Xanax so you can turn it into Zanz, a brand new drug, so you can keep the price super high, or make a new version of an already existing quinolone antibiotic. We're not going to pay for that. But if you want to figure out a new drug that's actually going to deal with something like Parkinson's or going to deal with something like Alzheimer's, yeah, we will fund that. And we will continue to fund it through universities. So let's separate the money making from the research making by doing away with patents on drugs, by simply declaring, and we can do this legislatively, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness includes the right to have pharmaceuticals that actually work, that you can actually afford, and therefore pharmaceuticals are no longer patentable, and we're going to subsidize the development of new pharmaceuticals, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And you would see drug prices drop to 10% of what they are today, maybe 20% at the most. And suddenly, people would not have to be cutting back on their insulin and dying. I mean, literally, people are dying right now because they're cutting their pills in half, because they're cutting their insulin doses down to the point where they're ending up with gangrene. Can you figure out anything wrong with this? And how's the economy treating you? And what do you think about my idea for a year of national service, a mandatory national service?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And should it include men and women? Should it be 18-year-olds? How do we do this? What are the options for it? We'll cover all this stuff with your calls when we come back. And welcome back. William in Woodland Hills, California, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, William, what's on your mind?
Pretty good, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
My older brother's an ophthalmologist. I'm a developer. Back in 2014, when the big hoopla was going on with the Affordable Care Act, we came up with this program, and based on Jimmy Carter's program. We love Jimmy Carter, by the way.
Right.
Habitat for Humanity. Well, we were doing a feasibility study on Habitat for Health, like basically the same concept. Put a medical student. You want to go to medical school? We'll put you through medical school. After you're done, we want 2 years of service to particularly grow a community clinic or urgent care or hospital or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But you're going to do pretty much.
You know, the University of Vermont does that. You can get a massive discount. I don't know if it's a full ride or not, but you can get a massive discount on your tuition at the University of Vermont if medical school. If after you get your degree, you commit to a certain period of time, and I'm sorry, I don't remember how long it is, serving the poorest communities in Vermont. Because basically, Vermont has 2 towns, maybe 3 towns that are kind of wealthy towns, but most of the state is very, very poor. The rural part of Vermont is deeply poor.
I'm reminded, I'm sure you probably recall this, you're around the same age as my older brother, but I recall when we were here in junior high, and he was in the Junior Achievement Program, and that motivated us, literally, and I'm like, whatever happened to that thing?
Yeah.
We kind of got our business acumen, if you will, cutting our teeth in that program back in the...
Yep, that was the kind of the business version of 4-H for farmers.
There you go. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, since you brought it up, my mother was a 4-H, one of the people that taught 4-H.
Yeah, and 4-H has gone away because all the family farms have been wiped out by these giant corporate behemoths coming in during the Reagan years. This is why Willie Nelson was doing Farm Aid, basically, regulating prices of farm commodities to the point that the farmers would go bankrupt. Then they'd buy up their farms, and then when they had all the farms in a particular state basically owned, then they jack the prices back up and make profits.
Agree with you completely. Tom, it's a pleasure talking to you. I'll let you take some more calls.
Okay, thank you very much, William. Good to hear from you. Steve in Harper, Washington. Hey, Steve, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hi. I would like to see a satirical comedy routine recognizing the draft dodgers from the Vietnam War era. I graduated high school in 1965, and going to Vietnam was central to my planning, my life. And I was successful through student deferments and employment deferments that's how I avoided going to Vietnam. So I would just like to recognize, and at the time I always thought that avoiding military service would be a great detriment to the political future of anyone. But it turned out not to be so.
Yeah, look at Draft Dodger in Chief right now, who wants to have his military
Draft Dodger
parade.
in Chief, yep.
Yeah.
And so that's my brief comment on today's world and Trump's 4th of July celebration.
Okay, great story. Steve, thank you very much, and thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We've got to get to work, my friends. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Amazing. We have, a TV monitor here in the studio, so I can just kind of look over every now and then and see if Trump declared war on somebody. and I just noticed that Ken Cuccinelli was on MSNBC, so I turned it off. God, he is the last person I want to hear from ever again in my life. He's one of the most destructive and despicable human beings that I have never met. Joy in Chicago. Hey, Joy, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. First, I want to say I absolutely love your show. Been listening to it for a while. First-time caller. A little nervous. But I agree with most everything you said. But when you said drafting 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds into the military, I'm a counselor. I work with PTSD. The human brain doesn't fully develop until we're 25 years old. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has some information out there, research that shows that when the human brain, when it's developing and it gets exposed to trauma, like a war, that it actually changes the physical characteristics of the brain.
Yes.
And that kind of damage, I think, would be horrible to put on Earth.
I agree. But my point, Joy, was that if every family in America knew that their kids had to, after high school, now I'm not saying a military draft, I'm saying a year of public service that can either take the form of joining the military, or it can take the form of, working in a hospital, building homes for Habitat for Humanity, joining the Peace Corps, going overseas and helping out, rebuilding America, planting trees, whatever it may be. But if every family in America knew that there was a chance that one of their kids might end up joining the military because they had to do that year of military service, I don't think that we would have all these wars.
Well, I think that's true, but I also think we still have a lot of corruption, and the chances of the people who would start those wars making sure that their kids had never had to do that, and the low-income people who don't have a lot of power would be the ones that get pulled into military.
Well, but they would have a choice. They could be pulled into working in a hospital instead. So
if there's an opening.
Yeah. Well, you would want to make sure that there were plenty of openings. I am opposed to compulsory military service, period. I opposed the draft back in the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was of draft age. I opposed a military draft to this day, unless we're in a World War II kind of situation where you can't get out of it. And I agree with your points about development. But I see this as, number one, a way to provide a transition to adulthood, essentially, a rite of passage for young people, something that is developmentally important and that does happen. You're right. The full, the orbital frontal area of the brain and all that. The inhibitory parts. I'm mangling my language here. The parts of the brain that control inhibition don't really fully develop until your early 20s. But that we're not having. Fewer than 2% of us have family in the military, and therefore we're having no serious discussion in this country about the consequences of war. Trump can threaten war with Venezuela, he can threaten war with Iran, and we're all like, so what? But if people thought, my kid might end up there, I think even without a compulsory draft, just as national military service, I think that the odds of that are much less likely, which means that we'd have much less trauma for everybody. But your point is well taken, Joy, and thank you for calling and making it. I appreciate it. We'll be back. It is 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day. How's the economy doing for you? Do you agree with all the commentators on TV and Trump that the economy is just wonderful? It seems not, from my point of view. And what do you think about my idea to lower prescription drug prices?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And, of course, military service. A lot of people want to weigh in on that. We'll be back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I, it's the Mueller Report. We're on page 135. This is about Paul Manafort and his association with Donald Trump. According to Gates, in March 2016, Paul Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. Subset 2, Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyovochin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages had been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, our friends, the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, absolutely, every article. Manafort further asked, how do we use to get whole? Has Deripaska operation seen? Kilimnik wrote back the same day, yes, I have been sending everything to Victor, that's Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD. That's Deripaska. Gates report that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would, quote, be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine. Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role on the campaign would help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska could not move forward with his lawsuit against Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik, in turn, could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information could also be shared with Deripaska. The next sentence has been deleted by Bill Barr. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instructions, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office, that's the Mueller office, that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates' account about polling is consistent, and then the rest of that is blacked out by Bill Barr. With multiple emails that Kilimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kilimnik internal data, and then the rest of that paragraph is blocked out by Bill Barr. The office also obtained, that's the Mueller office, also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kilimnik whether there had been any movement, quote, on this issue with our friend. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue, and our biggest interest as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue. Kilimnik replied, quote, I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significantly more attention to the campaign in his boss Deripaska's mind, and that he will most likely be looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss, Deripaska, end of quote. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kilimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, quote, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate, end quote. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
A couple of other things I wanted to bring your attention to. Welcome back to the program. Chennai, India, a city of 9 million people, is running out of water. As glaciers are melting around the world, these glaciers are the water reservoirs for many cities. They feed the Ganges, they feed the Yangtze, they feed many rivers that come out of mountainous regions of the world. And you combine that with the massive droughts that are happening in equatorial regions around the world. It's this 5-year drought that has been hitting Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The 114-degree temperatures in France a couple days ago, the highest in, 600 years, as long as they've been keeping records. Now in India, 9 million people are praying for rain. We have, if we had, 5 feet of hail in Mexico and Guadalajara. Here in Portland, Oregon yesterday, we had a tornado downtown. I mean, this stuff just doesn't happen, but it's happening now. We have climate insanity. And it's caused by the fact that the world is a degree warmer than it was in 1980, which means that the atmosphere holds 6% more moisture, which means that storms are far more serious. And the jet stream is collapsing, which means that weather patterns stay in place rather than moving through. So a light, what would normally be a rainstorm becomes a flood, and what would normally be a hot day becomes a drought. And this is all climate change. And meanwhile, what the Trump administration is doing is they're saying to their climate scientists, you guys are all going to have to move out to Kansas City or you get fired. Honest to God. On top of that, they're refusing to let their scientists, government employee scientists, go to conferences or talk about climate change. For example, a guy named, this is from the Washington Post, a guy named William Jolly. He's with the Rocky Mountain Research Station in Missoula, Montana, and he was supposed to go to Orlando, Florida, to the International Fire Conference, right, and give a presentation. It was titled Climate-Induced Variations in Global Severe Fire Weather Conditions. In other words, how to fight fires in the era of global climate change. The Trump administration said, no, you can't get on the plane. You may not give that presentation. And then that was this week. Last week, 3 EPA scientists were blocked from going to Rhode Island to make a presentation about climate change. I mean, this is insane. And then finally, another big piece of news here, Richard Neal, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, has finally apparently because he had to, dot I's and cross T's and do all the legal stuff so that he would have a good chance of winning, has sued has sued for the Trump taxes. He's suing basically the IRS and Steve Mnuchin. And, Mnuchin refusing to testify on this stuff, all of them refusing to testify. Go back to September 10, 1996, New York Times, an article by Stephen Labatum. The title, Susan McDougal Goes to Jail for Not Testifying on Clinton. Susan McDougal was sent to jail in Arkansas today as she continued to defy in order to answer questions about her former Whitewater partner, Bill Clinton. Isn't there a lesson here for us? Anyhow. Daniel in Manchester, New Hampshire. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind?
A friend of mine and I have been talking about copying. I think Israel has a 2-year mandatory draft.
Yeah, I don't know how long it is. I know they have it.
Yeah, and I actually was not in the military, though he was, and I suggested maybe kind of what you said, making it more like a public service as well.
Right.
I'm a firefighter, and had I learned that, I could enjoy a career in the fire department instead of going to college, I could have been a firefighter from the age of 18 as opposed to starting at 31. But also, wouldn't it be nice to see potentially some of our military actually become more of a humanitarian arm? We've spent so long destroying economies and bombing countries. Why don't we take some of our Army engineers and go over and rebuild hospitals, rebuild schools, and take these 18, 19, 20-year-olds, let them experience another culture, let them experience, something that they might not see, and I'll come from my perspective in Central South Carolina and Western North Carolina, send a young me to Iraq, Afghanistan, not to kill anybody, not to spread democracy, but to help them, develop their healthcare system, develop their educational system.
Well, and that does spread democracy, and that, America used to be viewed as the country that was the example for the world and also the country that helped the world. And now we're embarrassed by this orange monster. Not just him. I mean, this has been going on since Reagan. Now we're the country that yells and pounds its chest and says screw the world, and it's terrible. Daniel, excellent points all. Thank you for calling and making them. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Right here, Tom.
Hey, James.
I wanted to say something about my general overview was this. The wealthy people, either as they saw we were going into World War II or coming out of World War II, they saw that there was an opportunity for them to set up a plan as we're coming out of the war. And it was a very good plan, and I'm sure it was very detailed. It's nothing on paper, but they're orchestrating it now. And the one thing they have that the liberals don't have, and I'm not saying the liberals should have, is these guys are highly regimented.
Yeah.
And I think the only way we're going to control them is what we had before, a progressive tax rate.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you.
We call the top rate the anti-war tax rate.
Yes.
Here and forevermore.
Well, and there's people now suggesting that any time the United States is involved in hostilities abroad, that every family in the United States, if you're making under $50,000 a year, you have to pay a $25 a year tax. If you're making over $200,000 a year, it goes up to a couple $1,000s. But basically a war tax. And, it's not necessarily going to be, nobody's going to change their lifestyle as a consequence of the war tax, but it pushes it in their face. It makes us all know.
Correct me if I'm wrong. These are manufacturers are manufacturing arms nonstop, are they not?
Yes, it's one of our major exports.
They have to sell them. They have to sell them or use them. They can't possibly warehouse all that crap they're making nonstop. You know what I mean?
No, I get it, and that's why they're
making enterprise.
Right, and that's why that's why they promote organizations like the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. I don't know if they're getting money directly from the military-industrial complex, but these guys are basically war. They're neocons. They're warmongers. And, enough. Susan in Phoenix. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Sure. I actually had 2 points on the military thing. The one is, I've been saying this for a while, that we're investing so much money into the military that we need to somehow increase our programmers. I was a website person for 20 years in my own business, and I always tried to hire Americans. Unfortunately, they're very arrogant because there's so few of them, and they're expensive. I ended up using programmers from India. We need to increase our programmers because that's where we're being attacked. But the others, I think your 2-year idea or your year idea is awesome. Israel does do it, and women have to serve as well. They're all given guns for 2 years and taught how to use them and respect them. That might be something.
And they don't have a gun violence problem in Israel. Excellent point, Susan. Excellent point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Kyle in Rochester, New York. Hey, Kyle, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Oh, nothing much, Tom. I just wanted to talk about, how you were asking if the economy is working, and clearly it's not. Wages are stagnant. Yes, the stock market is great, but wages are stagnant. And we've turned over from what used to be an industrial economy to now we're basically a service economy, and a lot of these service jobs are going away to automation.
Yeah.
Luckily, one of the things we can do is the healthcare industry. We can get more healthcare workers out there, but based on the for-profit system, we're not going to be able to do it. And if we did, like you were talking about, the service, national service, we could train more doctors, more healthcare people to help people get healthy and make our society a better place. And not to mention the Green New Deal, which is a giant, industrial mammoth. It's
a jobs program. The Green New Deal is a jobs program, thus the phrase New Deal. I mean,
Yeah, we can jumpstart a whole new economy with basically a snap of a finger. We built our economy on the internal combustion engine, and it's time to pivot from it.
Yeah.
That's the choice. That's the choice we have in 2020. Basically,
Okay. I'm with you, Kyle.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm with you. Thanks a lot for the call, Kyle. Tony in Huntsville, Alabama, says you want to disagree with me about the about national service.
I do, Tom, and as much as I love your show, I hear your voice all day in my head. You're like a good friend of mine, and this is like, for black people, we hear it, but we know, and I think the other caller just couldn't articulate it, that we know that the federal government's going to be unfair against us. We just know it. I mean, go to the SBA, Small Business Administration. You won't get a loan. Somebody white might. Remember when they were giving the houses to the military vets coming out? Black people couldn't get those houses.
Well, that was back in the 50s.
Right. Here in Huntsville, this happened last year. They closed 2 black high schools, built a brand new white school, and instead of building a third school for the black kids, they shoved them all into one school. And then they gave the school that they closed a fancy academy name for white kids now.
Yeah.
We just know.
I get it. Okay. Tony, you're giving me good food for thought. Thank you very much. I need to ponder this. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. It is 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes. Stick around. And welcome back. Paul in is it Sem or Semi, California?
Lucerne, California. Tom.
Oh, Lucerne. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's up?
I'd like to agree with you, but I think it should be a 2-year mandatory service. And that one young lady earlier talked about the brain not developing until you're 25. Well, that kind of was, we need the 2-year thing. You get out of school when you're 18, you still don't know what you want to do. It doesn't have to be military. It could be like a job score thing, or we're about to have a really lot of old people. The baby boomers are now in their 70s and 80s. They're going to get nothing but older. They're going to need somebody to be a companion to them. So we can have a national, companion program set up like we do for big brothers and big sisters.
Yep.
We do the same thing for them.
Elder care.
It would give them a sense of, yeah, I did it. I went through school. I did my 2 years. I'm 20 years old. I'm ready to face the world. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I think it would help them.
Okay.
And if you look at the countries that do it, they're all way better off than we are.
Yeah.
Germany has a version of this, and a lot of European countries do.
Yes, they do.
All right. And look at their society. It's educated. It's more inclusive. They don't have the violent problem we do. And by the way, Israel does have a violence problem. Palestinians are being gunned down by Jewish citizens on a daily basis. It's horrible.
Well,
they don't shoot each other.
Yeah, yes, and I am regularly critical of the right-wing government and their position on all this in Israel and their unwillingness to even now talk about a two-state solution. And what's going on in Gaza is an abomination. I'm with you on all that, but I'm talking about things like mass shootings and whatnot. But I get what you're saying, Paul. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Jack in Culver City, California. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind?
Yes. I was drafted in '65 after I received an engineering degree.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that if you disrupt a person's education, many times you'll disrail it. So maybe after education, you serve your...
Well, increasingly these days, people are talking about a gap year. I mean, it's kind of like the hot new thing is to take a year off after high school and find yourself before you go to college, particularly among, upper middle class white kids. This would just be institutionalizing a version of that, don't you think?
I went right from high school to junior college, and then into UCLA.
Yeah.
In engineering, which is not an easy subject.
Right, but you still could have gone into engineering if you had spent a year in the military, couldn't you? Or a year building houses with Jimmy Carter.
Many times they find that life easier than education. They're making a little bit of money, so they disrupt their education.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Okay, so, but the bottom line is you're saying we really need to give people. I get it. Okay, okay. Thanks a lot for the call, Jack. Really, I guess the good news is Jack and I are disagreeing about how it should be done, not whether it should be done. And I would like to see that as a kind of a staging for college. But anyhow, we'll be back. Luke Vargas is going to be with us in just a minute. Stick around. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. And on the line with us is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, joining us from New York, Luke Vargas. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. And Luke, two things. Number one, it's been 24 hours since Iran exceeded the threshold from the, basically the Iran deal, the JCPOA or whatever it is. And number two, the quote breaking news that I'm getting off Chyrons on television is that Mike Pence's plane turned around in midair and went back to D.C. And there's a lot of speculation about why. It was not, anything wrong with the airplane. Might it be that the Trump administration is planning on doing something violent that has to do with this?
I'd say on the Pence development, there's been a lot of rumors swirling around, and I think it's worth separating what's been confirmed from what hasn't. So yes, the vice president was going to do a campaign event in New Hampshire, which was abruptly canceled. His office saying, quote, something came up. A lot of other people have been pointing to developments in the past few hours in Russia, where a very advanced mini nuclear submarine, which the U.S. believes is probably one of the more secretive elements of the Russian Navy, which was rumored to be used for snipping underwater telecom cables, caught fire, and many in the crew died, prompting Vladimir Putin to cancel his day's schedule. So there was some speculation it could be something related to Russian security, but we don't know at this point. It's probably hasty to speculate too much on what Pence's change of plans is about. On the Iran side, I think the focus now is turning to three European countries who I think between them hold the keys to the future of the Iran deal in their hands, which would be Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. That's because we're in a weird stage of this whole Iranian nuclear diplomacy where it's in the hands of the remaining signatories of the deal, the U.S., importantly, not one of those countries, to decide whether they take this IAEA-confirmed sort of technical nuclear-related violation on Iran's part, holding on to a little bit too much low-enriched uranium, not weapons-grade fuel. We don't have any indications yet Iran is in any way making a move towards a nuclear weapon, but they are holding on to a small amount, too much, of this low-enriched uranium, which is a technical violation of the deal. The way this agreement was written, if Iran thinks it's not being treated fairly, they can appeal to have a little, group formed to study the alleged violation by the other countries, and vice versa. So in this case, it would be up to China, Russia, the UK, France, or Germany to lodge a complaint that Iran has violated the deal, at which point a 65-day timer would start, where various other parties of the deal and the IAEA would start meeting together to assess what had happened and how to respond. Once that process is set in motion, it's actually very easy to see how this deal would collapse, because there is, at the very end of that 65-day countdown, a UN Security Council vote that would occur. And it is carefully written, language by the Obama administration, that any country on the UN Security Council could veto the continued sanctions relief for Iran. That's really particular phrasing. It's not that, hey, do you want to snap back sanctions, yay or nay? It's, do you want to continue to give Iran the benefits that it was supposed to be given by the terms of the nuclear deal?
But have they not lost a lot of those benefits anyway because of the U.S. sanctions?
They definitely have, but were the U.S. to veto that continued relief, it would instantly snap back all of the international sanctions, which are not currently in effect. It's U.S. unilateral sanctions and sort of the strong arming that we've done to deny Iranian oil a place in global markets. So those are existing, and they are severe, and it's severe enough to lead us to where we are now. But were we to get this dispute resolution timer of 65 days going, it's all but certain that at the end of that, the U.S. would basically snap back all of the international sanctions on Iran with a Security Council veto. But to take it back to where we are right now, you still need one of these existing parties of the deal, the U.S. not a part of it, to agree that that's the path we want to go down. And with such a clear outcome at the end of that period, I think there's justifiable, understandable hesitancy, specifically on the part of France, the UK, and Germany. I don't see a scenario where Russia or China scuttles the nuclear deal by referring Iran's violations to the UN Security Council. But, will France, the UK, and Germany do that is a big question. France and the United Kingdom, both permanent members of the Security Council, were very, very vocal last week at the UN in New York, saying, we consider the Iran nuclear deal to be the absolute cornerstone of international diplomacy, and they do not want to take us down a path where that gets sunk by one of their actions. But I think it'll be really worth watching whether the U.S. puts pressure on those European allies, especially if Iran starts to do what they've now been threatening, which is to possibly start enriching uranium above this 3 2/3% enrichment level. It's going to be increasingly difficult for those European countries, as much as they wish the Iran deal could still be fully in effect, for them to sort of not acknowledge that there is a nuclear-related violation here. So it really comes down to those three countries, I think.
Right, and it also raises the question, what happens if Boris Johnson, who's Trump's best buddy, becomes the Prime Minister of the UK?
Right, there's the vote. It's difficult to see Germany or France, maybe, in the current political context, being the ones to do that, especially with the German foreign minister now looking to become a huge figure in European Union politics after some last, sort of breaking news on the European leadership front the last few hours. I don't think Germany or France will be the one to scuttle this. You're right to, I think, point our focus over to the United Kingdom.
Yeah. And meanwhile, there's some climate change news, new research in Nature magazine, fossil fuel power plants. We've got about 30 seconds here. You want to lay it all out?
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, it's been about a decade since scientists looked at committed emissions from fossil fuel infrastructure, which is going around the world, tallying up all of the emissions that we can basically build into our emissions diet for the next half century. And unfortunately, the big expansion of coal power plants in China and India in the last decade and a half, those plants are going to stay open for 30, 40 more years unless they get decommissioned early. And that's kind of the new front line, I think, for emissions activists is, we've already changed the economics. So building these fossil plants doesn't really make much sense compared to renewables. When do we cross that price threshold where maintaining coal infrastructure is just not viable? We're close, but not there yet.
Remarkable. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. Luke, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to check in with Professor Steve Keen, professor of economics, on the state of the economy, and can we avoid another financial crisis, or are we staring down the barrel of one?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 135. This is about Paul Manafort and his association with Donald Trump. According to Gates, in March 2016, Paul Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. Subset 2, Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyovochin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages had been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, our friends, the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, absolutely, every article. Manafort further asked, how do we use to get whole? Has Deripaska operation seen? Kilimnik wrote back the same day, yes, I have been sending everything to Victor, that's Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD. That's Deripaska. Gates reported that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would, quote, be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine. Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role on the campaign would help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska could not move forward with his lawsuit against Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik in turn could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information could also be shared with Deripaska. The next sentence has been deleted by Bill Barr. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instructions, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office, that's the Mueller office, that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates's account about polling is consistent, and then the rest of that is blacked out by Bill Barr. With multiple emails that Kilimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kilimnik internal data, and then the rest of that paragraph is blocked out by Bill Barr. The office also obtained, that's the Mueller office, also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kilimnik whether there had been any movement, quote, on this issue with our friend. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue, and our biggest interest as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska-Pericles issue, Kilimnik replied, quote, "I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significantly more attention to the campaign in his boss Deripaska's mind, and that he will most likely be looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss, Deripaska," end of quote. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kilimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, quote, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate, end quote. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. It's the Mueller report. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is our old buddy, Professor Steve Keen, the author and, the economist, most importantly, and the author of the new book, Taking the Con Out of Economics. Prof. Steve Keen, KEEN.com is his website. Prof as in Professor, Prof. Steve Keen, STEVE. And his Twitter handle is also Prof. Steve Keen. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. I think you also know on Patreon, don't you? That's Patreon.com/Prof. Steve King.
Okay, there you go. Patreon.com/Prof. Steve King also. Steve, with your beautiful Australian accent, sometimes you talk so fast that it's hard, I think, for some of our American listeners to understand absolutely everything you're saying. And what you're saying is so important that I'd like to ask you to kind of slow down just a little bit. Is our economy weak and getting worse, or is it great and getting better? What's going on with the economy?
Well, the economy is doing what I expected to see it do after the financial crisis, which is, summarized in a simple phrase, turn Japanese. In other words, emulate what Japan went through since its bubble economy burst back in 1990. And what that was marked by was a period of large-scale private sector deleveraging over 25 years, where every time the economy appeared to revive under the stimulus that the government was giving it, they'd take away the stimulus, they'd put the rates back up again, and oh dear, the economy would slow down once more, and they'd go back and reverse the process. So that's what I see happening, not a serious crisis, but a period of what look like recoveries that stagnate too quickly under the influence of policy, where the policy is then reversed and the recovery begins again, wash and repeat for maybe the next 15 years.
So instead of boom, bust, which we've been having since George Washington, and we're right now in the longest boom since that time, you're suggesting that the Japanese have kind of pioneered a way to just kind of muddle along, basically?
In a sense, that's true, because what the Japanese have been doing, as we all know, is dramatically increasing the level of government debt. It's gone from about 40% of GDP to 240% of GDP across that period. Now, that's the thing everybody focuses upon. What's actually been driving the whole thing is private sector debt going in the opposite direction. So you had a bubble economy in Japan that began in, literally they called it the bubble economy, began in 1980, a huge speculative binge on real estate and the share market, drove them both astronomically high, all driven by leverage. So over that period of time, I'm working roughly with my head here, but private debt went from about 170% of GDP to 225% of GDP. Right on the end of 1990, literally the last day, the stock market started to tank, and from that point on, people were reducing the level of private debt as well, most of the time. And that reducing of debt meant people were using the deposit accounts to pay down their outstanding debt, which means credit was negative. And then the government didn't know anything about this because they're trained by neoclassical economists. They don't understand the role of credit. So the economy would appear to revive under government stimulus. And then when it started to revive, they thought, oh, we can go back and reduce the stimulus again. When they removed it, the private sector went back to reducing its debt levels and the economy fell over. So that's what I'm seeing happening in the American data as well, from not quite as severe a high level of private debt, but the same basic dynamic.
So, and just so people know, when you talk about leveraging and deleveraging, you're talking about basically acquiring debt and shedding debt or paying down debt.
Yeah.
So, my understanding is, Steve, we're talking with Professor Steve Keen, his new book, Taking the Con Out of Economics, that, my understanding is that the amount of individual consumer debt that we have right now, the amount of individual, well, first of all, that since 2014 or 2015, the economy would not have grown, the U.S. economy would not have grown at all had it not been for a combination of increased leverage or debt in both the government sector, the corporate sector, and the individual sector. And that, number two, the levels of debt in the corporate and the individual sector, and I frankly have no idea about the government sector, and the levels of inequality right now have already surpassed what they were in 1929. So if we're at that 1929 threshold, is it that the Fed didn't respond to the 29 crash appropriately, and that's why the depression was so severe? Or and this time around they might be able to do it like the Japanese did, because we've learned from that? Or is it that actually things are actually different than they were then, and those numbers are misleading?
Yeah, well, if you go back to the Great Depression, the level of government spending was of the order of 1/6 what it is now compared to GDP. So, like these days, roughly speaking, most industrialized countries, including the USA, have a government sector which is about 30% of GDP. That all occurred during the Great Depression and the Second World War. Before that, it was about 5%, certainly no more than 10% of GDP. So what it meant was that when there was there was no unemployment insurance, for example, in 1929. Okay.
So there were no stabilizers, basically. That the government is the government spending and is sort of a buffer to it all, and then on top of that, the government, through things like unemployment insurance, has the ability to be a stabilizer.
Yeah, I mean, you can think about it in terms of an air conditioning system. Back in 1929, you could open the windows. Back in 2007, you had an air conditioning system. So the scale of capacity to change what's happening with the economic climate is much larger now than it was then, even if the government's not doing it intentionally. But of course, there has been intentional policy as well, and that's been QE, and that's been an extremely expensive and extreme inequality increasing.
Yeah, this quantitative easing
for the private economy.
Right. This is quantitative easing when you say QE.
Quantitative easing. Yeah.
So if what you're suggesting, Professor Steve Keen, is that instead of boom and bust, we've now figured out how to have kind of maybe a gradual downward slide in terms of the amount of debt in the economy, but not anything that's going to be radical or dramatic. I would assume that what that means is that unemployment will slowly go up, but not terribly, that housing prices will stop, increasing really dramatically. And in fact, I guess when you include rural housing prices, they haven't gone up as much during this last recovery than they have during previous ones. That basically from the point of view of the average American, the average consumer, the average person, who has a job or wants a job, how do you prepare for this? How do you understand this and prepare for this? And how would that be different than, for example, I know people right now who are trying to sell their houses thinking that we're at a market peak, and then they're going to rent for a year on the assumption the market's going to collapse, and they'll be able to buy a house for half the price that they just sold their house for. Are you saying those days are over? And if so, how do we respond to this new world that you're describing?
It's a problem, Tom, because the scale of recovery really has been driven by government stimulus, both conventional stuff and then also the quantitative easing. And on the quantitative easing, there's no limit for the Federal Reserve's capacity to pump money in such a way that it actually affects asset markets, particularly the share market. So the downward vulnerability isn't there until the Feds stop doing the stimulus. And then when it does, it doesn't have the reaction they expected. I see the stock market crash back at the end of last year as a result of the Fed going from quantitative easing to quantitative tightening, and rather than buying bonds off the private financial sector, selling bonds to them, taking money out of circulation, it coming out of the stock market sales, and down goes the stock market. Well, they instantly go back to quantitative easing again. So I think there's going to be a topsy-turvy world like that, where effectively the government is using its fairly limitless capacity to stimulate the economy without being aware that's what it's doing.
But isn't there has to be a limit somewhere to this? I mean, Europe now has negative interest rates. You pay banks to hold on to your money. This has never happened in the history of 7,000 years of economics, is my understanding. How does this all end?
Well, it isn't actually. It's not that private banks are paying you interest, negative interest, or that they're giving you like a negative loan. It's the central banks that are putting negative interest rates on the reserves of the private banks. You've also got bonds being so oversubscribed. The yield is negative on the bonds, so it's all affecting the financial sector. But it is unprecedented. No two ways about it. This is the lowest level of interest rates in the history of the records of interest rates, which go back something over 3,000 years. So we've never had an experience, even under previous social systems, let alone under capitalism. So it is unprecedented. And it is something the government's got a limitless capacity to keep on doing. This is the point that modern monetary theory makes, but they don't make it in relation to this sort of behaviour. They're talking about what they think is desirable behaviour by a government. But fundamentally, because the government creates the currency through the central bank, if the central bank decides to create, as it was doing under quantitative easing, $1 trillion a year worth of cash that it uses to buy financial assets, that boosts what Michael Hudson calls the FIRE sector, financial insurance and real estate, boosts that sector, and some of that money dribbles over into from Wall Street economy into the Main Street economy, which is part of where the fall in unemployment has come from. But that's it's got an unlimited capacity to keep on doing it. And if it gets afraid of stock market crashes or house price falls, which of course have happened, and then reverses direction to keep the asset markets going, then it can continue inflating those asset markets indefinitely as well.
Remarkable. Does that mean the stock market is going to go up forever?
Well, it could mean. It's gone up, trebled or quadrupled from its low, and it's all been really driven by the level of money coming in from quantitative easing. There hasn't been the same level of speculative buying driving up share prices. And the old, one of the Wall Street adages is don't fight the Fed. Well, while the Fed's been doing this, people have been making a very nice killing out of, very low volatility rising stock markets. I think this party is not going to be upset by what can happen in the economy. My expectation is this party is going to be upset by what happens with the ecology.
The ecology? Oh, you mean global warming?
I mean global warming.
Wow. Okay, and that's a whole other conversation.
Assassinate share prices.
Yeah, Steve, we're going to have you back sometime to talk about that. Steve Keen, ProfSteveKeen.com or Patreon.com/ProfSteveKeen. His Twitter handle, ProfSteveKeen. Steve, thanks a lot for dropping by.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Great talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your thoughts and my thoughts on all of that right after this. Stick around. And welcome back, Barbara in Bradenton, Florida. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
I'm such a fan. Thrilled I got through. I wanted to agree with you about the public service because I worked for like Neighborhood Youth Corps back when I was a kid in New York, and it teaches you the work ethic and kind of gets you in the groove to become a working adult. And I think it would be great for the country. And also wanted to talk about the Democratic field of candidates and how when I watched the debates of the Republicans way back when, they were all a bunch of real idiots. And watching the Democrats, they're like all great.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it gets across how great the party is. And you can't emphasize enough what an existential threat Trump is to our democracy. And I'm hoping that whoever does win the nomination will harp on that and educate Americans about the importance of free and fair elections, and we've also got to fight that battle, because if they don't count our votes, it doesn't matter what we do. So we've got to get to the bottom of all this corruption of the Republicans.
Yeah, I agree. It's not just Trump; it's Trumpism, and it's not just Trumpism; it's the Republican Party's embrace of it all. Excellent points, all. Barbara,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Great. Bye.
Yeah, great talking with you. Mark in San Diego. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I like this discussion about the compulsory service. I kind of tend to disagree with you a little bit. I think that the military should be compulsory. You and I both were during the Vietnam War era, and honestly, if they didn't have a military draft during that time, do you really think that there would have been these vehement anti-war protests? I'm sure there would have been some, but I don't think it would have been to the extent if there hadn't been a military draft where everybody's son and daughter had some skin in the game.
I agree with you, Mark. The reason why I'm not suggesting an all-out military draft, or at least one with a conscientious. Yeah, I mean there were exceptions back then. You could sign up as a conscientious objector. It was just very, very difficult to do. But the reason, and you pretty much had to have a whole family religious history to prove it. But the reason why I'm not suggesting that right now is I just don't think it's politically feasible.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. But honestly, when somebody's son or daughter has the possibility of serving, I'll bet you this flag waving and drum beat for war would subside substantially.
Yeah.
Because
but even if you could choose one or the other, it would be a possibility. And in fact, you could calibrate it so that during times of war, the government might be able to say, okay, a certain percentage, instead of only 30% of people going into the military, we're going to have to push that up to 40, which means that there's going to be a certain percentage of people, and I have no idea how you'd parse this out and sort it out and figure out who was and wasn't, but a certain number of people are going to have to go into the military whether they want to or not.
Well, that's a really good idea. It's always these people that don't serve in the military that like to wrap themselves in a flag and
John Bolton.
And surround themselves with military tanks, like on July 4th, like Trump intends to do. He really has some psychological thing about the military, because I think he feels really guilty for not serving when he should have, and he's trying to overcompensate every single time you turn around. But everybody that wraps himself in the flag, because my dad was in World War II, in North Africa and Italy, and he said anybody that's been in a war just doesn't want any part of it anymore.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard from all my friends who are veterans, and from most of our politicians who've been veterans. Spot on. All very well said, Mark. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We've got so much on our plate here. Should we do away with patents for drugs? I think this is a great idea. Dean Baker of, as I recall, the Economic Policy Institute, writing about this over at Truthout. And just having the government fund all research into pharmaceuticals. Yes, some of it can be done by the drug companies. Most of it is already being done by our universities. I mean, this is the kind of the dirty little secret. The drug companies say, oh, we've got to have these huge profits because we've got to fund research. And then they take the profits and they put it in their pockets. I mean, literally, they pass it out to their stockholders as dividends, or they give it to their CEOs as pay. And yeah, they do some research, but most of the research is paid for by you and me already. So why don't we just pay for all of the research and have some say in the research and make sure that the research is actually serving the public good? Doing away with patents could cut the price of pharmaceuticals by as much as 90%. It would almost certainly cut them by at least 70%. Just a very simple thing, just simply saying, legislatively, Congress could pass a law that says, because Congress passed the patent, Congress passes patent laws to begin with. Congress can carve holes in the patent laws. And like I said earlier, right now, you can't patent coffee, but there's a thriving coffee business. You can't patent tea, but there's a thriving tea business. You can't patent bread, but there's all kinds of companies competing on bread. Just because you can't patent drugs doesn't make the drug industry go away. So Congress could pass a law saying no more patents for drugs, which means anybody can make any drug. All they have to know is, the chemical formula and the method to make it, which would become common knowledge. And then drug companies are competing on the quality of their product, on their ability to deliver it to the marketplace. There would be a whole brand new spectrum of things that they would be competing on. And also they would have less of an incentive to try to tweak existing drugs, which is what most of the drug company funded research goes to, so that they can simply renew or extend their patents and keep their prices way up there. And insulin would, instead of $1,400 a month, it would go down to its actual cost, which might be $20 a month. It seems to me like this is a really big deal. And, Donald Trump promised he was going to solve the drug price problem. Not only has he not solved it, but drug prices have gone up on 3,400 drugs just in this year. And we're only in July. They've already gone up 17%, these 3,400 drugs. Why? Because they can. A patent is a monopoly. And these drug companies have these monopolies, and they're saying, hey, we're just going to squeeze every penny we can out of the American consumer because Congress is going to let us. Well, I'm saying, Congress, stop letting them. There's a way to do this. I would love to see this become part of the Democratic platform. And I would love to see one of the Democratic candidates pick this up and run with it. So if any of you candidates are listening, or consultants or people on their staff, whisper in their ear about it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls after this break. It's coming up on the bottom of the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, where despair is not an option. Viagra for your brain. It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 135. This is about Paul Manafort and his association with Donald Trump. According to Gates, in March 2016, Paul Manafort traveled to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida to meet with Trump. Trump hired him at that time. Manafort agreed to work on the campaign without pay. Manafort had no meaningful income at this point in time, but resuscitating his domestic political campaign career could be financially beneficial in the future. Gates reported that Manafort intended, if Trump won the presidency, to remain outside the administration and monetize his relationship with the administration. Subset 2, Paul Manafort's campaign period contacts. Immediately upon joining the campaign, Manafort directed Gates to prepare for his review separate memoranda addressed to Deripaska, Akhmetov, Serhiy Lyovochin, and Boris Kolesnikov, the last three being Ukrainian oligarchs who were senior opposition bloc officials. The memoranda described Manafort's appointment to the Trump campaign and indicated his willingness to consult on Ukrainian politics in the future. On March 30, 2016, Gates emailed the memoranda and a press release announcing Manafort's appointment to Kilimnik for translation and dissemination. Manafort later followed up with Kilimnik to ensure his messages had been delivered, emailing on April 11, 2016, to ask whether Kilimnik had shown, quote, our friends, the media coverage of his new role. Kilimnik replied, absolutely, every article. Manafort further asked, how do we use to get whole? Has Deripaska operation seen? Kilimnik wrote back the same day, yes, I have been sending everything to Victor, that's Boyarkin, Deripaska's deputy, who has been forwarding the coverage directly to OVD. That's Deripaska. Gates report that Manafort said that being hired on the campaign would, quote, be good for business and increase the likelihood that Manafort would be paid the approximately $2 million he was owed for previous political consulting work in Ukraine. Gates also explained to the office that Manafort thought his role on the campaign would help confirm that Deripaska had dropped the Pericles lawsuit, and that Gates believed Manafort sent polling data to Deripaska, as discussed further below, so that Deripaska could not move forward with his lawsuit against Manafort. Gates further stated that Deripaska wanted a visa to the United States, that Deripaska could believe that having Manafort in a position inside the campaign or administration might be helpful to Deripaska, and that Manafort's relationship with Trump could help Deripaska in other ways as well. Gates stated, however, that Manafort never told him anything specific about what, if anything, Manafort might be offering Deripaska. Gates also reported that Manafort instructed him in April 2016 or early May 2016 to send Kilimnik campaign internal polling data and other updates so that Kilimnik in turn could share it with Ukrainian oligarchs. Gates understood that the information could also be shared with Deripaska. The next sentence has been deleted by Bill Barr. Gates reported to the office that he did not know why Manafort wanted him to send polling information, but Gates thought it was a way to showcase Manafort's work, and Manafort wanted to open doors to jobs after the Trump campaign ended. Gates said that Manafort's instruction included sending internal polling data prepared for the Trump campaign by pollster Tony Fabrizio. Fabrizio had worked with Manafort for years and was brought into the campaign by Manafort. Gates stated that, in accordance with Manafort's instructions, he periodically sent Kilimnik polling data via WhatsApp. Gates then deleted the communications on a daily basis. Gates further told the office, that's the Mueller office, that after Manafort left the campaign in mid-August, Gates sent Kilimnik polling data less frequently, and that the data he sent was more publicly available information and less internal data. Gates' account about polling is consistent, and then the rest of that is blacked out by Bill Barr. With multiple emails that Kilimnik sent to U.S. associates and press contacts between late July and mid-August of 2016. Those emails referenced internal polling, described the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's role in it, and assessed Trump's prospects for victory. Manafort did not acknowledge instructing Gates to send Kilimnik internal data, and then the rest of that paragraph is blocked out by Bill Barr. The office also obtained, that's the Mueller office, also obtained contemporaneous emails that shed light on the purpose of the communications with Deripaska and that are consistent with Gates' account. For example, in response to a July 7, 2016 email from a Ukrainian reporter about Manafort's failed Deripaska-backed investment, Manafort asked Kilimnik whether there had been any movement, quote, on this issue with our friend. Gates stated that our friend likely referred to Deripaska, and Manafort told the office that the issue, and our biggest interest as stated below, was a solution to the Deripaska Pericles issue. Kilimnik replied, quote, I am carefully optimistic on the question of our biggest interest. Our friend Boyarkin said there is lately significantly more attention to the campaign in his boss Deripaska's mind, and that he will most likely be looking for ways to reach out to you pretty soon, understanding all the time sensitivity. I am more than sure that it will be resolved and we will get back to the original relationship with V's boss Deripaska, end of quote. 8 minutes later, Manafort replied that Kilimnik should tell Boyarkin's boss, a reference to Deripaska, quote, that if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate, end quote. Manafort has alleged to the office that he was willing to brief Deripaska only on public campaign matters and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, we did a poll and over on YouTube and or maybe it was Facebook. I'm not. YouTube. It's YouTube. Okay, thank you, Nate. AOC says progressive Dems' frustration with Pelosi on impeachment is quite real. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Are you frustrated? If so, why? We had 1,900 people vote. 84% of you said yes. 16% said no. Some selected comments. Bookaholic Blues said, I think big donors like the Koch brothers who are donating to centrist Democrats are telling Pelosi to hold back. That's why we need to get rid of the large money out of politics. Devil Travels says Pelosi seems not to have let fellow Democrats know her supposed plan. No reason to trust her judgment. Simple Man says regular Democrats don't control their party or Pelosi, just like regular Republicans can't control Trump. And Melanie Sherratt says, Tom, I'm sure Nancy knows info we don't, but until we do, start the impeachment process to request more information. Interesting how people are, shall we say, concerned about all this. Anyhow, back to your phone calls and all the topics we've been talking about here. Jake in Whippany, New Jersey. You want to disagree with me about a year of military service or public service that could be military, could be not?
Hi.
Hey, Jake.
Yeah, sorry. I had my phone down and I was barely listening.
No, it's all good.
So I hope you're doing well. Yeah, I want to disagree with you about that. To me, it seems, if I understand your argument correctly, you're saying that if we have this, I think you said 2 years. No,
I said 1 year. A number of people said that it's in other countries it's 2 years and we should go with 2 years.
Okay.
I don't know, but 1 year sounds good to me.
1 year.
Yeah.
1 year of mandatory public service.
Right.
You're saying that would cut down on the United States' propensity to go to war?
I think so. I think, well, at the very least, what it would do, since military service is an inevitable option, it's not inevitable, but it's an inevitable option, it would cause junior high school and high school students, middle school and high school students to start seriously paying attention to world politics, to international geopolitics, to the political scene here in the United States, international geography, all the things that we're so dumb about now that have, that allow people like Donald Trump and George W. Bush to basically lie us into wars.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, that sounds like, this would inevitably involve essentially funneling more people towards the military, and I don't think you deny that because you said that you're...
Well, no, the military's need for people is not a function of the supply. The military's need for people is a function of the demand, that is, whether or not we're in a war. And so if more people were politically active and conscious, we would be less likely to be in wars, in my humble opinion.
It's a function of apply to a certain extent, or supply to a certain extent, because if people do not want to fight wars, then they can't be fought necessarily.
No, it's not true. What happens is when people don't want to fight wars, the military starts offering $10,000 signing bonuses, which they've been doing since Iraq. In fact, the signing bonus got as high as $50,000 at one point.
$10,000 signing bonuses for what? Like just paying people off to get into the military?
That's correct. We've been doing that since the Iraq War.
Okay. I mean, yeah, but what do you call it? If there's I don't think the scenario is very likely, but if there's, actually, I'll use a more realistic example. So after Vietnam, there was something called Vietnam Syndrome, where nobody wanted to go to war, even the people in control of the military apparatus and the government. They were, kind of scared that they were going to lose another one. So
well, they just knew the horrible cost of wars, Jake. I mean, and that generation is dying off, which is why I'm concerned that the next war is inevitable.
I mean, actually, the reason why it's kind of hard for the United States to go into all-out war these days is because we had not necessarily the same situation, but a similar situation where the population did not like the Iraq war at all. And so people are kind of tired of war.
But we're still in Iraq.
The United States, I mean, yeah, we are, but that's not a popular war. I think you'd agree with me on that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that makes it hard for the United States to go to another war.
Well, the other point that I'd make, Jake, is back to my point of, if young people started paying attention to international geopolitics and the relations between countries and that kind of thing, because there was the possibility of military service. The other thing that's changed from Vietnam is that during the Vietnam era and basically all wars prior to that, most of your casualties were military casualties. In other words, most of the people who died in wars were the people fighting the wars. Today, most of the people who die in wars are civilians because of technology, because we've got drones, we've got smart missiles, we've got guided missiles, we got all this kind of stuff, and which, in my opinion, makes it even more important to make sure that our young people, as they're coming up, this is the future, these are the next generation, these are the people who are going to be our next legislators, everything else, that they're well informed about the causes of war, that they're well informed about America's relation to the rest of the world, about what conflict might be happening and things like that, because it's so easy to get into a war with a minimal amount of cost in terms of human lives. I mean, we only lost 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers in this illegal war that Dick Cheney got us into in Iraq. Compare that to 56,000 people in Vietnam, and this has lasted 2 or 3 times longer than Vietnam. But there have been hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians who have died, and over 5 million have been displaced, whose lives have been completely, utterly shattered and destroyed. So, anything in my mind that's going to make war more real for young people, not that they're going to have to fight in it necessarily, but just that they need to be thinking about it, is a good thing. That's part of my argument.
Well, I agree with you to the extent that I think that young people need to pay more attention to geopolitics in that sense. But, I mean, you said they're not necessarily fighting in wars. I think when you involve people in a mandatory public service program like that, and eventually it's going to end up with people in that program who do go to fight wars. And what might happen then is the mechanism for getting them to pay attention to geopolitics more is sending them off to a place like Iraq, which you said accurately we're still in, to kill people and get killed.
Yeah. No, yes. And, thanks a lot, Jake, for the call. I think we're starting to talk around in circles here. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. David, you had some thoughts?
Tom. This is David. I wanted it'd be interesting to hear Mr. King and Richard Wolf together.
Yeah.
I wanted to weigh in on the economy. It's been horrible for me. Actually, for about the last 20 years, I've been a throwaway employee. Got a Bachelor of Science, but you couldn't guess that it's done me any good, because every time I turn around, it's contract work. 3 months here, 6 months there, and now everybody doesn't want to even pay me anything. They're offering me wages back what I used to get back in the 90s.
Yeah, but before Reagan came into office, the average family was supported by one breadwinner. Now the average family requires more than 2.
Yes, and I'm taking care of my 93-year-old mother. And this, once again, all politics are local.
Yep.
She had a trust that was well endowed, but because of Paulson and Greenspan keeping everything, the trust can't speculate on stocks and bonds. They were making money as long as they could do CDs, but once that has been disintegrated to nothing. So she didn't have enough money to get home health care. They want $4,000 a month, and I'm unemployed again, so I'm stuck, so I'm taking care of her, and I can't leave Tulsa to find a job. I've been offered positions, but I can't leave.
Right.
And it's just, I'm really, I'm stuck.
It's a tough one. That's a tough one. So, David, go ahead.
It's this whole thing of the contract employees, and it's something that I haven't heard anybody really address what they're going to do, because, once your contract, if you got insurance, you get insurance at the contract company. Well, once you're not employed, well, so much for your insurance. Thank God I've got the VA. That's the only reason why I'm alive.
Wow.
Because I've got universal health care.
Yeah, we had about a 20-minute, 30-minute conversation about this last Thursday with our, and in fact, a couple of times it came up with our labor panel in Chicago. And this thing that, frankly, before Reaganomics was illegal, to call an employee a contractor. It has now become kind of the norm in most businesses, and I think it's an abomination. David, thank you for...
You go into offices, and there's like 3 or 4 people that actually get a paycheck from the company. Everybody else is a contractor.
Yeah, and it's wrong. It's obscene. I mean, I get it with part-time employees, but I mean, genuinely part-time employees. But what you're talking about and what we're talking about here is a completely different thing. David, thank you for the call. I hope things get better for you. I really do. Verdell in Mansfield, Ohio. Hey, Verdell, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I don't want to get too deep into the conversation, but mandatory service. I was a homeless vet.
You were a what? A homeless vet. Okay, got it.
And I've been safe for about 3 years now.
Mm-hmm.
The military is not for everybody, but I think service, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. Verdell, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your story with us and your comments. I'm with you. And that's why I'd like to offer the option. Kurt in Greeley, Colorado. Hey, Kurt, you wanted to come back around to prescription drug prices?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. They don't own they don't invest their own money to develop these drugs. It's about 73% comes from the U.S. taxpayer.
Yep.
Then they take those and totally rob us every single day. It's absolutely insanity.
Yeah, and if we simply did away with patents on pharmaceuticals and made them like, herbs. I mean, you can or vitamins. You can buy vitamin C, or you can buy, saw palmetto or ginkgo biloba, or pick your
absolutely.
From 30 different companies, right? And they're all competing on price and quality.
But it's not even just pharmaceuticals, which is egregious enough. It's also everything else we've done in our society. I'll give you a few examples. I could literally go on for days of examples. But LASIK eye surgery was developed back in the 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was very, very expensive, and it didn't work all that well. It's about 60% successful. I don't even want to know what happened to the people that it didn't work on.
Yeah.
But it was about $10,000 an eye. Today, you can get it for around $500-600 an eye, right?
Right.
And 99.9% successful, right?
How's that not a good thing?
It's an amazing thing. But the corporations didn't fund that technology to get that technology to make it so ubiquitous that we can all do it. Then the space station did. If it wasn't for NASA trying to find a new way to dock the space shuttle to the space station with the laser algorithms to do that, we wouldn't have that LASIK drop in prices and
I had no idea.
Efficiency. Exactly, because before then, to dock a space probe to another thing, honestly, it was a very highly technical process, basically called bump and grind. Well, we didn't really want to do that with a brand new space station.
Right.
So they had to redo the algorithms of the laser to make sure it fit with less energy than a bird landing on a branch. And they took that technology and said, wow, we can do this with LASIK now. And I'll give you one more from astrophysics. An MRI machine?
Sure.
Happens to be pretty popular, pretty profitable, correct?
Right, we got 30 seconds here, Kurt.
All right, well, if it wasn't for astrophysics, designing lasers and stuff to look at densities of clouds and things, we wouldn't have the ability to look inside the human body without cutting it open. So those are taxpayer programs.
So
the technology.
MRIs were developed, the technology for an MRI was developed in order to look at weather by the federal government?
No, through NASA to measure density of clouds and stuff in space.
I see. Wow.
And then a physicist down here said, I can look inside something and tell the density of a tissue? Yes, you can. Well, I can do something with that. MRI comes out.
Amazing.
So they don't own any of this stuff. We do.
Yeah, there you go. Kurt, well said. Kurt, thank you very much for the call. That's fascinating. I I have the smartest listeners on earth. It's such an honor to sit here in this chair and hang out with you guys. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes, or it's 12 minutes, 48 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
One of these days, I got to learn how to subtract instead of just adding. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joe in Cupertino, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to respond to the poll yesterday, but that would be Elizabeth. But, anyway.
Okay.
I had the experience of enlisting. I volunteered.
Mm-hmm. Which branch?
I wasn't a Coast Guardsman. I was a medic. And before I went in, I was an EMT. And so I brought my skills to the Coast Guard at 20 years old, and they took me with open arms. I'm against compulsory service because as a recruit, I volunteered and then I worked in the recruit training center for 2 years as a medic. And if you weren't in the service and if you were in the service and you didn't want to be in the service, or just signed, but you didn't realize what you were getting into, it was terrible. And because I had the fortunate experience of having a rate before I went in, I went right to a school right out of boot camp. Because if you didn't, you had to work really hard to get a school.
Oh, yeah.
So it was drudgery for a lot of guys. I mean, some of my brother-in-law, for instance, he didn't ever get a rate. He stayed a seaman apprentice the whole time. He was a swimming instructor. He enjoyed it, but it was just he didn't get a school. So I would be supporting of non-compulsory, but maybe some college first before entering our complex and technical military. So as it not to be a dumping ground for people that necessarily don't have any skills. Because that's not what we need today. We need people that are willing to serve and have technical skills to advance. It's, I guess, for me, I have high school kids, and I'm afraid you're recruiting them in high school. They don't know any better. Maybe if we wait until they're 20 years old or 25, as that woman would say, we would have more technological experience. I mean, an officer goes to the academy for 4 years on the government dole. It's probably the best education you can get, and they get them at 18 in high school, so that would be an option. They don't let them serve they don't let them active serve until they get out of the academy. But it's a much better candidate than just taking somebody off the streets that has no direction and giving them something to do. Now, as you had suggested, the Peace Corps is an option, and I would say that this would be a great thing for the new Green Deal, because this Conservation Corps or something like that they used to build the Hoover Dam would make a big impact.
Yeah. Excuse me, Joe, I don't remember from the Vietnam era, but my recollection is that only the Army was drafting people, that if you wanted to join that if you were in the Navy, the Air Force, or the Coast Guard, they were entirely voluntary. Is that recollection correct?
Well, you could not get into the Coast Guard during time of war because it was such an easy way to, avoid service.
Right.
So they were very selective. But the Navy and the Air Force, I believe, were services of choice. So you would go into the draft and they'd take in the Army unless you said, well, I'll join the Air Force.
Yeah, or the Marine Corps.
That was your option. But the services, though, are a wonderful place to find yourself. As I found as I grew up and when I got out, it's the best thing I ever did, and it served with pride. And when I die, I want to die as a veteran and be buried in a cemetery with other veterans because, this is the proudest moment of my career. And I was a paramedic for 30 years, but I enjoyed the service in the military. I'm sorry I got out after 4 years, but it was a lonely time. 2 years at sea is a long time.
Yeah, wow, 2 years at sea. You think of the Navy in those terms, but not the Coast Guard. Huh.
Well, they've had to have a medic on every boat, so we went underway.
I see. Okay. Joe, thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing your story with us and contributing to the conversation. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Cupertino. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It is 52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And James in High Point, North Carolina. Hey, James, you wanted to weigh in on Dean Baker's idea on, and the one that I'm saluting. And basically, this was Thomas Jefferson's suggestion that we simply not have patents for drugs. In fact, Jefferson didn't want patents for anything. And then later, after when he became president, he tried to argue that they should never last more than 3 years. Well, you know, a whole bunch of companies, particularly Big Pharma, have certainly changed those rules. What's on your mind, James?
Well, patents in general. But, you know, when we talk about drug patents, the thing about drug patents is they're kind of special in the fact that they affect the broad population. The other thing is, even if you have a drug patent, you cannot sell that drug unless the drug has been okayed by the FDA.
So those are two strong arguments for saying that drugs are a unique category that should be exempt from patent protection for those reasons.
Yes, and well, yes, I would have to say that, because the other thing about drugs is you're not going to get an individual that's going to come up with a complex molecules drug that's going to cure any disease. You're going to need a big corporation for that.
Sure.
So they work on a couple of levels. The larger corporations have their lobbyists that set the laws so that, you know, all the patent laws favor them. And then on the other side is, so in other words, a small company can prove a patent or get it and bring it to market. But in a lot of cases, they run out of money, and then before they are able to get that drug to market, they usually have to sell out to a larger company.
Yeah, and they're functionally doing this with generics. I mean, the brand name pharmaceutical companies have bought up all the generic companies, so they're jacking the price of generics now.
Right, because I mean, the game is fixed because it's a regulatory on top of the patent.
Right, and a lot of these drugs are not even actually made by these drug companies. They're made by subcontractors in India and China.
Absolutely. Now, that's not to say I'm going to foo-foo all patents, because when you go down to technology, when you know, just like the device I'm talking on right now, I mean, a lot of that stuff is, you know, intellectual property. And the thing about it is, once you submit a patent, people can come through the patent office, even if you're a small company, or even an individual. Larger companies can come through the patent office, see that patent, and then they can you know, take that patent and use it. Now, if you're a small company or an individual, what will happen is you can sue the company that's using it. Maybe, you know, a large company. I'm not even calling any names, but they'll continue to use that and say, "Well, see me in court."
Right.
So the court process costs money, and usually, you know, say 97% of the times they're going to run the smaller owner of the patent out of business before he can actually win a case.
Right.
And so what happens is, and well, if you look at where the economy is based nowadays, patents are a large part of the economy. I mean, you know, you talk about intellectual property. There's more intellectual property than real property in this country.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's here, including copyrights and trademarks along with patents. Yeah. James, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Thanks for a very thoughtful analysis. I learned from it. I appreciate that. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, as we're heading into the holiday weekend. Please tell your friends about our program. Spread the good word, however you're getting it, however you're, you know, and you know, wherever you're listening, let the station know, let the advertisers know, let the underwriters know that it's of value to you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!